Welcome to our little session on money and politics, my two favorite subjects. I am Mike Mazzei, the CEO of this wonderful company and amazing team with a couple thousand households in 44 states, and we are just privileged with the opportunity to help you along life's journey and your pursuit of your lifetime goals and objectives. We are very much aware that watching the news lately can be a little disturbing and a little unsettling. Former President of the United States has 2 assassination attempts. Current President of the United States gets pushed off, an election ballot. There's a war in Europe. There's a conflict in the Middle East that could expand. There's obvious inflation that, in spite of some of the lessening of inflation pressures, prices are still up 20, 30, 40% for you, your kids, and your grandkids. So we think in the middle of September, it's time to think about that great American pastime of baseball. And so, when we think about baseball season, we know there's only about 10 games left. How many of you are still baseball fans? We got some baseball fans. Joe, what's your favorite baseball team? St. Louis Cardinals. I've been a Cardinals fan since I was 7 years old, and my dad up here at the front table had me in Little League, taking me to St. Louis games, and we're just a mediocre team this year. But we still love the Cardinals. And, baseball reminds me that sometimes when we're dealing with unusual issues, it just helps to take a moment, take a breath, and think back to that wise and sage philosopher, Yogi Berra, with some great yogiisms. Here's one of them. I didn't really say everything I said. I think that sounds like a politician. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. How about this one? It's deja vu all over again. And this last one's really important. You should always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. So, Yogi points the way to some clarity in life, and our goal today is to try to give you some good information that'll add some clarity. And our message is, all things considered, the data points to a continuation of the uptrend that we're all experiencing now. Market uptrends are ultimately determined by fiscal policy coming out of Washington. And though power in D.C. is currently divided, I'm amazed that the more things change, the more things they kind of stay the same. I've been a student of history and economics since 1985, when I had an opportunity to work in the United States Senate full-time for 7 months. That was obviously the Reagan era, so I became a Ronald Reagan fan. And I was looking through some things given what we were dealing with now, and I found this clip from Reagan.
We're talking with former Governor Reagan, and during the break we were discussing, when I mentioned that I thought most people were not apathetic, I think they're confused, basically, because you hear intelligent people from both political parties or in the middle, conservatives and liberals, and they all seem to have different answers as to what is going wrong in the country. Some people say, well, let's let the government spend billions of dollars, and then other people say, no more federal spending. let's give the tax rebates. And the other intelligent people say, no tax rebates, we've got to do this and do that. So everybody is confused. How do you see the thing? How are we going to get out of this?
Well, Johnny, I think that one of the things is that people keep looking to government for the answer, and government's the problem. A moment ago, you asked, about people and feeling not only confused, but low and down in America. First of all, the American people, if they would just take a little inventory and look around, you triple our troubles, and we're better off than any other people on earth. And we've asked so much of government, and we've gotten in the habit over the last 40 years of thinking that government has the answers. There's very little that government can do as efficiently and as economically as the people can do themselves. And if government would shut the doors and sneak away for about 3 weeks, we'd never miss them. Now, if the people want to be
Anybody you had in mind particularly?
No, I said this while I was in government.
Okay.
Our biggest problem is that we have built a permanent structure of government, federal, state, and local. The permanent employees, and they've come to the place that they actually determine policy in this country more than does the Congress of the United States. Mm-hmm. There are 14.5 million public employees in the United States. That's quite a voting bloc.
Reagan was talking about some of the same issues that we're dealing with today. Is government too big? What should tax policy be? Well, this next election will determine that, and we like to remind everyone that no matter who's in charge in Washington, D.C., the markets tend to go up. As a matter of fact, if you look at this chart, generally when you have divided government, say a Democrat Senate, a Republican House, and a Democrat President, you get pretty good market returns. Or how about a Republican President and a Democrat House? You get pretty good market returns. The underlying lesson of this particular chart is in all of the potential power scenarios of Washington, D.C., the market goes up because Ronald Reagan is right. The ingenuity and innovative power of the American people to generate growth and prosperity is unmatched in the history of the world, and our economy is like an Elon Musk SpaceX rocket that just keeps going higher and higher and higher because it's fueled by the power of amazing people who have amazing careers just like you. Now, we're all wondering who's going to be the next president of the United States, and the news is ubiquitous in terms of the daily national poll between between Harris and Trump, and you can throw this daily report on who's got the lead, Trump versus Harris, because the national polls don't matter. What matters is what's happening in the individual 50 states and how our electoral map shapes up. The magic number is 270. And on this particular chart, the red or dark red states are likely going to vote for Trump, and the blue and light blue states are likely going to go for Harris. And it's the battleground states of Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I don't think Virginia's really a battleground state. It's going to go for Harris more than likely. North Carolina and Georgia. So if Trump wins Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, he's going to be president again for a second time. If Harris can run the table on those gray states and pick off one of those three states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, win Georgia like Georgia went in the Biden column in 2020, she will be president of the United States. For some of you, you hear us talk about the betting odds. And if you get on your computer, you can literally Google or Safari election betting odds, House, or election betting odds Senate, or election betting odds president. And if you type those in today for president, and keep in mind sometimes the betting odds are right and sometimes the betting odds are wrong. But as of today, the betting odds for president lean slightly towards the Harris column at 53, 52%. The economy, when it's growing and there's low unemployment, would generally favor the party that is the incumbent to the White House. It's a little different this time because even though, as you can see up there, corporate profits are doing well, inflation has been a nasty bugaboo, and most Americans out there think America is on the wrong track when you run those political surveys because they're dealing with 20, 30, 40% higher prices for everything. Those price pressures in terms of increases going forward are starting to mitigate, but prices aren't coming down. We expect the Federal Reserve later today to start lowering interest rates. So normally, an economy that's growing, the latest GDP report got revised for the previous quarter to 3% growth. The expectations going forward are for 2 to 2.5% growth. Interest rates should be coming down. Unemployment slow. That is a pretty good picture that we're probably going to avoid a recession going forward, and you would think that would help the party that currently controls the White House, but as we said, it's a wide open race at this point. If we stick with our baseball theme and we try to analyze a little bit of Team Harris versus Team Trump, we should put out the disclaimer that, as most of you know, I'm a conservative Republican who served in the Oklahoma State Senate for 12 years with friends like Representative Mark LePac, who's a client and a state rep still working down at the Capitol. And then for 2 years, I was the Oklahoma Secretary of Finance, because apparently I was the only one who understood how the finances of the state worked back then, Mark. Joking aside, when we stick with the general baseball theme and try to understand who's got more offensive power, it reminds me of the story of these two retired Trinity Strategic Wealth clients, and they like to have coffee in the morning, and they're talking about last night's baseball games. Discouraged about the Cardinals, but excited about the Kansas City Royals. We got any Kansas City Royals in the crowd? Where's Max when you need him? The conversation eventually came to, do you think there's baseball in heaven? And that night, one of the guys had this amazing vision from heaven, and he's watching a baseball game, and he gets to play in a baseball game. And the next morning, he's so excited to talk to his morning coffee buddy, and he says, hey, guess what? I had this amazing vision, and heaven's terrific, but there's good news and there's bad news. And his buddy says, well, what? Tell me. Well, the good news is there's definitely baseball in heaven. The bad news is you're scheduled to pitch on Saturday. If we analyze just from an offensive firepower standpoint, the Harris tax hike plan, we're not particularly excited about the capital gains tax rate proposal going to 20% to 28%. That would obviously affect the sale of some of your taxable investments going forward, and it implicates business spending. That's a 33% increase in taxes. The proposal to take the corporate tax rate to a permanent 28% from its first level of 15% is nearly a 100% tax increase. We often tell you that profits are the mother's milk of the stock market, so overburdensome taxation, along with some spending proposals from the Harris team on helping everybody have some money to buy a house or a first house, for example, we think could hinder the firepower, the offensive firepower of the American economy. The Trump plan is make the 2017 tax cuts permanent and then get back to some things that he likes on drill baby drill to lower energy costs and lower regulations. We do know from 2016 through 2020 that that particular economic policy approach created wage growth across every demographic above and beyond the rate of inflation. The Biden economic strategy did help facilitate economic growth, but wages did not keep pace over the 3.5-year period with inflation. So make of that what you will, but from a pure economic standpoint, the Trump economic plan is probably preferential for a continuation of the American economic juggernaut. Now, ultimately, whoever is president has to deal with the Oklahoma House of Representatives. I'm sorry, not the Oklahoma House of the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. And I recently talked to my friends, U.S. Senator James Langford and our local congressman, the very hardworking and very bright Kevin Hern. And they have both said they have no idea what's going to happen with control of the U.S. House. It's so close right now. Republicans have a three-member majority, and it could flip either way. If Harris has coattails, it could probably go the Democrat direction. If Trump has coattails, it could go the Republican direction. The betting odds right now have the Democrats taking control of the House by 62%. So they've made some real gains there, and that could either help Harris White House or hinder a Trump White House. I think everything's really going to come down to, though, in terms of whether there's divided power or not, the U.S. Senate. And this one's historical, or a historical anomaly at the moment. It's a pretty tough map for the Democrats because they have to defend 22 seats. And Republicans only have to defend 8 seats. So it's just, it's harder, it takes more money. Right now, if you look at the state of West Virginia, since Joe Manchin retired, the very popular Republican governor, Jim Justice, is likely to win that race in a Trump state. He's ahead by 30 points. So you've got 5 races in there, basically, that'll determine who gets to 51. Republicans are close. Democrats need to win. Basically, they need to run the table. And then if Harris and Walz have the White House, Walz can break the ties. I was literally invited as a guest to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee and got to listen to 100 speeches. About 5 of them were pretty interesting. One of those was the Republican candidate from Montana. Now, the Democrat incumbent up there, Jon Tester, has historically been pretty popular, and it doesn't really matter who's been running for president. He's got a tough re-elect battle on his hand. My Republican friends, Kevin Hern and Senator Langford, are pretty impressed with the candidate out there that's running against current Senator Jon Tester. His name is Tim Sheehy. He was one of the interesting speeches I got to listen to. Very impressive individual because he was a special forces military guy in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then once he got out of the Army, he started this company that became very successful in the security and contracting universe. So he's putting up quite a show. As far as I know, it's relatively tight out there, and that's one of those races that will probably determine who controls the United States Senate. Now, as much as we talk about politics and fiscal policy, which is incredibly important. What tends to be more important is who's in charge of the Federal Reserve and what's going on with interest rate policy. And yesterday they had a meeting, and this morning they're meeting, and I called Jerome Powell this morning through my high-level contacts in Washington, D.C., and I told him, my clients of Trinity Strategic Wealth expect a half-point rate cut today. So he told me he had already talked to Andy Steinmetz and Derek Sands and Jeremy Locke, because everybody had been calling, and David Moore, and he said, Mike, we're coming up with a half-point rate cut. Actually, we don't know what they're going to do. I think our chief investment officer thinks that they're a little bit behind the curve. The job market has slowed a little bit, and it's time to get away from these higher interest rates, and no need to start incrementally with just 1/4 point. They ought to announce today, probably about the time you're getting up from your chairs, a full half-point rate cut. But we'll have to see. That the lawyer who turned into a sometimes economist, who's now chairman of the Federal Reserve, comes through for us or not. I'm going to call him again tomorrow if he doesn't do the right thing. These are a couple of the scenarios that could play out. Again, we really don't know. There's Republican control. There's a bunch of different divided government scenarios. I think because of the way the U.S. Senate map is lining out, the odds are pretty low if there's a full Democrat control of the White House, the House, and the U.S. Senate, because it's just pretty tough for them to hold on to the Senate at this point. But if we get Republican control, those are some things that might take place. If I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would probably say somehow we're probably going to end up with some sort of divided government scenario. Sometimes the American people go, I'm going to go with this person, but I'm not sure about their party right now, so I'm going to vote this way over here. It's not uncommon in this age for Americans to sometimes split their vote between parties and focus on local stuff versus all the national stuff. So we'll see. We'll be watching out for you in terms of what policy will shape economic power going forward. The nice thing about our system is every Monday we meet as a full-blown investment committee to look at all of these issues and what's happening with interest rates. So I think the peak in the 10-year interest rate got up to 5 point what? Got right up to 5. This morning it was at 3.6. So that and the bond market is an expectation that the Fed's going to lower interest rates. And if the Fed lowers interest rates, what happens to mortgage rates? They go down. What happens to rates on buying a car? They go down. So that generally spurs more business spending, more consumer spending. I would expect 6 to 9 months from now that the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury, which this morning was at 3.6, to be hovering somewhere around 3. 3.2, 2.8, assuming we avoid a recession and the Fed tries to get their rates down to 4.5%, which is, again, a good boost for corporate spending, corporate finances, and ultimately corporate profits. So those reasons are why you may turn on the news and it's, oh my gosh, there's this and there's that. My wife won't watch the news. She's just like, oh, I just can't take it anymore, Mike. But in the midst of all that, the stock market's setting new highs. So there's some really good fundamental stuff going on, and we think that's going to continue. This particular bull market started at the lows of 2022, and this is a rising uptrend. And did we officially set a new high in the S&P 500 yesterday? Yeah, we did. So we've had a couple of new records in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We've got a new high in the S&P 500. We get these lower interest rates, we avoid a recession, we get corporate profits still growing in the 8 to 12% range. This uptrend's got 2, 3, 4 years left in it. Historically, bull markets last on average 4 years, and we're only in year number 2. So we do feel optimistic going forward. We are using that particular optimistic mindset in terms of strategy for the various portfolio types, which we'll get to in a second. And we love milestones around here. We literally just did some in-office fun stuff because thanks to all you wonderful people, the assets under management of Trinity Strategic Wealth just eclipsed $1.5 billion. And that makes us one of the largest independent wealth management firms in the entire Midwest. And so once again, we thank you for the privilege of getting to serve you and work with you. We're definitely blessed that the Lord Almighty in heaven, as our gracious provider of everything, not only gives us the opportunity to work with you, but has blessed us with growth and the opportunity to work just as hard as we possibly can to give you best of class in comprehensive financial planning and best of class in investment management. With that, the Mazzei family ourselves get to celebrate a little bit of a milestone. Most of you know that I have only 5 kids, and this is the first September in 27 years I'm not paying some educational institution for tuition. And not only are we done with college expenses for 5 kids, but they all have jobs. One of them still wanted money for something yesterday. But hey, my wife and I next week are going to Italy for 2 weeks for the first time ever. As a lot of you know, I'm half Italian. My dad and his wife, Gay, have been to Italy, 20 different times. And so we're looking forward to that. And I can spend money on a trip to Italy, and I'll still save money this year compared to the last several years. So we're looking forward to that, and we're grateful for these milestones. This is an interesting chart that just kind of reminds you when you hear some of those folks out there that say, the market's too high, it's gone up too much. Stuff can happen in the world, and we don't mean to minimize, risks, and we're the last people that, bury our heads in the sand. But instead of what we call price-weighted averages, if you just look at the 500 stocks and you weight them all equally versus Amazon gets, this extra emphasis on the S&P 500 and Microsoft has this extra emphasis. If you just treat everybody equally, not their market weighting, their market size, we really haven't had a bust out of the broader market in the last 2 years. And so that's one of the things that tells us if interest rates come down, valuations aren't too expensive, there's more room to run, and that's how we can focus on making you more money. So in order to make you more money, for those of you, and many of you in your financial plans, because they're fairly sophisticated, might literally be in all 4 of these strategies with different accounts. So we've got 25 models now. So if you're in one of the dynamic portfolios, we're basically neutral right now since prices have gotten a little expensive. We want to have the normal position in stocks, we want to have the normal position in bonds, and we've even got some hedging or quote-unquote buffer positions to alleviate a little bit of the volatility that might be ahead. Traditionally, going into an election, there's generally a sell-off. The Democrats are scared to death that the Republicans are going to take over. The Republicans are scared to death that the Democrats are going to take over. And everyone's wondering what's tax policy and economic policy going to be. And so you just get a little bit of a wait-and-see attitude, and buying tends to taper off. And when buying tapers off, there's more selling than buying and prices, drift lower. So don't be surprised, even with all this, good optimism I've been sharing, there isn't a price decline going into election. That happened with 2016, that happened with 2020, but in both cases, Trump got a rally, Biden got a rally. The underlying economics always, answer the bell, not necessarily, who wins an election. We're more concerned about the economics and the Federal Reserve than we are who wins the White House. But don't be surprised if your statements for the next 4 to 8 weeks kind of go like this, maybe drift a little bit lower. And so we've got some defensive positions in the dynamic portfolios. The strategic portfolios are fully invested at this point, a little bit targeted to a slightly more participation in these, what we call mega caps now, the powerhouses of the American economy: Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook, NVIDIA, Broadcom. Who am I missing? Netflix, not so much anymore. But we want to make sure you get good participation in this uptrend, and we do think it'll last another 1 to 2 years. The stock portfolios, whether they're focused on growth, versus dividends, have had a few adjustments recently, but they're definitely benefiting from good participation in the technology sector. This momentum of artificial intelligence is helping the profits of some of those companies. And then ironically, in my entire career, I've almost never bought utilities for clients, but for many of you in our dividend portfolios, I just picked up the Darth Vader of the utility universe, NextEra Energy. Now that doesn't mean anything to you, but for people like Mark Lepak and my political friends, I used to say pretty bad things about NextEra because they were making loads of money off of the tax credit program in Oklahoma for wind power. But we don't use politics in investment decisions. And so this is my example of did I say Netflix? NextEra. So NextEra had made a lot of money off of Oklahoma taxpayers. But today, because of artificial intelligence and the power required to generate all of this artificial intelligence activity, their production for electricity is going up. And so to juice their earnings, they don't have to borrow money necessarily like they always did in the past. And so we've positioned in a few power companies like NextEra Energy for that very reason. And fortunately, they're up a little bit since we bought them, and they're paying a nice dividend. The bond portfolios, we had a client in yesterday for one of our church nonprofit accounts. You get into bond portfolios because you'd like to make 3%, 4%, 5% in dividends over time. Well, because the Federal Reserve is about to lower interest rates, the prices of the bonds are now starting to go up a little bit. So in this client session that we had yesterday, you could actually see some gains in the bond prices. So it should be a pretty good season for bonds over the next 1 to 2 years as the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates. And when appropriate for a financial plan or a financial strategy, we're trying to take advantage of that for you. And with that, we're going to bring Andy Steinmetz up to the stage, our Chief Investment Officer. And I do want you to remember one thing. Whenever you're worried about, America, wondering what's going to happen with your candidate or your non-candidate, I know most of you wish there were different candidates in both parties. Remember the wisdom of Winston Churchill. You can always count on America to do the right thing after it's tried everything else. And so America's best days are in front of us, and if Ronald Reagan were standing here today, that's what he'd tell you. So we'd love to take some of your questions as long as they're not too hard. Politics, money, politics, markets, finances, elections. We're going to bring around the mic so everybody can hear you when you ask a question. All right, you can count on Peggy with her husband, John.
Could you talk a little bit about tariffs? Because I've heard so many different ways.
You want to take it?
You want to answer the political part, I'll answer the market part.
The political part is tariffs are a weapon that we need for trade negotiations to be fair because too many countries have taken advantage of America for too long. The economic part is...
So there's a debate on, okay, are tariffs inflationary or are they not inflationary? I think that's been in the press a lot here lately. So it's kind of a gray area. Using China as an example, so one of the tariffs that's out there is on electric vehicle batteries from China. The reason it's out there is that the U.S. is trying to get companies to circumvent China and not use them and find other places to get the batteries from. So for the most part in that area, they can get the batteries at the same cost from somewhere else, so it doesn't end up being inflationary, but then what they're trying to do is hurt the Chinese economy and get a better deal. Depending on what happens, who gets elected, what the tariff strategy is, you could see prices creep up a little bit in some places, but they try to do it in a way where it's not inflationary for the American people once it actually comes over. So from an economic perspective, it's trying to protect the U.S. economy and consumers. It's just how do they actually implement it once they get in there to make sure it's what they intend it to be.
Peggy?
That was my exact question.
Tariffs. Wow. These clients are astute. They want to get into tariff policy. I'm very impressed.
So are you pro Trump's tariff policy, Mike?
I grew up in an economics school where tariffs are bad because the increased prices get passed along to the customer and they create inflation. After we saw China literally ripping us off, for 20 years once they got into the world economic system, I think it's appropriate in a limited fashion if another country is taking advantage of us and they're dumping cheap product into our country and to support their labor force, and as a result they're crushing our manufacturing force because it's not a level playing field, then in this era I am all for, personally, this isn't quote corporate investment strategy, but Mike Mazzei, I am all for 10 or 20% tariffs in the area where we need to create a level playing field for the American worker. It's a good question. Yes, Brad.
Okay, my question is on the unrealized capital gains tax plans.
I didn't even bring that one up.
Okay, so here's my question. So let's say I go out and I buy a stock. Time passes, the price doubles, and then I pay a tax on that extra value. More time passes.
Without selling.
Right, without selling.
That's what unrealized means, without selling your position.
More time goes on, price goes back down, and I sell it at the price I paid. Is the government going to refund me my tax payment?
Call Bernie Sanders. I'll let you dive into that. It's not as scary quite as you think, but it is a terrible, 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 terrible idea.
So it's one of those, what can I say on the campaign trail that sounds good to the base, but isn't necessarily, hey, we can get this in the laws and have it actually work. But the way that it's being talked about now is putting it on the top tax rate people instead of, normal Oklahoma people that make a normal salary. So it's less of a concern. It's like Warren Buffett's held Apple for umpteen years and has all this money he's made on it. Let's tax that guy. So it's more a concern there. It's just, from our perspective, it's okay, even if they can't get that done, are there other things in the tax code that they can get done that we need to be worried about? And again, it's okay, what are they talking about now versus what can they actually implement when they get in there? We typically don't make investment decisions until the elections are done, the policy actually gets put in, and we know what it is, because they're going to talk about a bunch of stuff right now that's not actually going to happen. So
I predict it'll never, ever happen. About half of my predictions are right.
that's a yogiism.
That is a yogiism. We could start Mazzei-isms. Oh dear, they're going to start running for the doors at this pace. Who else? Such a learned crowd with so few questions. Oh, Gabe, what's your question?
I'm curious about how the national debt affects all of this.
Great question.
Giving me all the questions today.
Huh?
You're
I'll
giving
take
me
it. You can have it.
I'll take it. So national debt, we're at $35 trillion now. Debt to GDP is 120.
120%.
So there's a couple ways to look at it. In terms of how we look compared to the rest of the world, I usually use the term we're the cleanest dirty sheet in the laundry hamper, because everywhere else...
He's got 3 boys.
I do have 3 boys. So in terms of that, relative to other places, we're better than the majority of them, especially the major economies of the world. It is an issue that needs to be dealt with, obviously. The interest rate that we're paying on the debt is another big part of it, so that's ticked up to be almost 4% now.
$1 trillion in interest payments this year.
Yeah, so coming out of COVID, when interest rates were super low, it was closer to 2%. So you've had almost a doubling in how much we're paying on that. As the Federal Reserve starts to lower interest rates, a lot of that issuance that the Treasury is putting out is Treasury bills, which mature from 0 to 12 months. So we would expect that interest rate to come down, but it's still an issue in terms of economic growth. As there's more debt, I mean, you guys know this with your household balance sheet, more debt is less money you can spend or invest or do things with. So it's the same for the federal government. It's one of those issues that could be something we have to deal with 5 years from now. It could be 20 years from now. It's something we always keep an eye on from an investment standpoint in terms of, okay, is this something we need to deal with right now, or is it, they're going to keep kicking the can down the road and try to figure something out? So we're always watching that.
One more.
I have a
Jody's
question.
got a question.
Well,
Uh-oh.
I'm wondering if Andy has a really good political story for us.
Oh, political story. Yes. So, okay.
Oh, good. It's not about me. I was worried for a second.
I can tell a story about you too after this one. So, as Mike mentioned, we have 3 boys, 5, 2, and 5 months. So we got a lot going on at home. So this morning, I'm driving our 5-year-old. His name's Brooks. I'm driving him to school, and as I'm getting ready, he's like, hey, why are you putting on a tie today? Because normally I don't put a tie on to go into the office. I'm like, well, we have this seminar today. It's about politics. So we're in the car, and he's like, well, what are politics? Which is one of those, like, how do I tell a 5-year-old about politics? But I kind of explain it, and then we're talking about, there's a president of the United States, and he asks who the people are he can pick to vote for. I'm like, well, you got to be 18, but these are the two people that are running. I tell him a little bit about each of them. And he's like, you know, Dad, I think I know who would not be a good president. I'm like, okay, enlighten me. And he's like, Curious George would be a terrible president for this country. I'm like, well, yeah, buddy, that is true. So,
How many of you would take Curious George over the other two?
so 5-year-old wisdom, there you go.
Yogi Berra,
Brooks Steinmetz.
Brooks Steinmetz. Woo, we are walking down the deep philosophical path today.
Yes, we are.
Anybody else before we depart? Yes, Greg.
How is AI impacting your business, setting strategy, doing research, and how do you see it maybe going forward, changing things?
I have completely no idea and I'm clueless. No, that's a great question. He asked before we got the microphone over there, how is artificial intelligence affecting our business and everything else? So I'm going to give you the business answer. I'll let Andy take a stab at the corporate profit, stock market answer. So a year ago when this all started mushrooming, I thought, I got to understand this stuff. And the only way I'm going to understand this stuff is I use it myself. So my Cracker Jack teammate, Ashland, is married to a cybersecurity expert. So he let me piggyback on his ChatGPT. And I used it for a reference letter that somebody had asked me to do. It was amazing. I typed in blah, 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 spit out the letter. I only had to make 1 or 2 changes. I thought, this is remarkable. As some of you know, I do some weekly articles and I send some stuff to the newspapers. So my next research article, I used it. It was terrible. It couldn't critically think through the issues. It barely gave me a workable outline. And so it helped me see, Greg, kind of what it's good for and, where its limitations are. What we're all trying to figure out in the business world is, how can this improve productivity? How can this enhance the value that we bring to customers? In a university setting where they're spitting out these major league, reports after doing all this research, it can help them with their peer-reviewed journal articles if they have enough integrity to go through it and, really look at it themselves. We're not really using it on a day-to-day standpoint unless one of the planners or advisors can tell me otherwise. It is going to eventually help us assimilate more data quickly for some of the work we do on a weekly basis to absorb information from the markets, the economy, et cetera. And so I want to be able to get everybody functional in it. In terms of how it's affecting some corporate profit groups, however, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, NVIDIA is the easy example because they have chips that drive most of this. But you're seeing it start to broaden out. Mike mentioned utility companies earlier in terms of, hey, we got to build out these data centers and do these different things. So you're seeing it kind of infiltrate different areas of the market. I think yesterday BlackRock and Microsoft announced a $30 billion fund to try to build out AI infrastructure. So it's a big thing where personally, and then kind of what we've seen. So for me, I'll give an example. Like today, Jerome Powell speak for 30 minutes to an hour about all different things with the economy, the interest rates. AI can kind of go in there and summarize it. And if I need like a quick version, I can get it really easy instead of having to sit there and listen to the whole thing or read the whole transcript, which I'll do anyways. But that's one way we see it. The other way that we've seen it a little bit is, if you sign a document, it used to be there's some person at the home office somewhere that's got to double check that this signature matches that signature, that matches that signature, and it's all the same person. So a lot of companies like banks that have to deal with things like that, they just have AI do it now. And it's right more than the humans are right. So for some of these companies, to Mike's point, you're seeing productivity pick up or profits pick up because, hey, instead of having to pay this person to do this task over here, we can have AI do it, and it's more efficient, it's right more of the time, and we don't have to worry about it. So those are kind of few and far between, but we're starting to see it more and more and more as people get used to, okay, what is this exactly? So.
Very good question. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We just are so privileged that we get to help you pursue your lifetime goals and values, and we hope you have a blessed and wonderful day.